This is Duke University.
The Abandoned is a new black sci-fi series by writer and director Keith Joseph Adkins. Atkins joins us this week to talk about The Abandoned and the struggles of making independent black content for the internet. And later we're joined by Professor Bettina Love as she talks about her new book on black girls in hip hop. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and this is Left to Black.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G for this one. Yeah.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal, and we're joined this afternoon by Keith Joseph Atkins, a playwright, a screenwriter, artistic director, whose credits include The Final Days of Negroville, The Last Saint of Sugar Hill, and the award-winning Sweet Home. He is currently the writer and director of the digital sci-fi series, The Abandoned. How are you doing today, Keith?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great. So let's start with a couple of things. Black sci-fi. In a lot of segments of the world, that doesn't make sense to folks. So talk a little bit about how you got interested in writing and directing and working on this series, The Abandoned, in which it is a black cast that is dealing with, the end of the world, for lack of a way to describe it.
Right. It's interesting. I grew up pretty in love with the film Alien and then also Aliens. Mm-hmm. And I also watched a lot of syndicated episodes of Lost in Space, right? And I had no idea it was sci-fi that I was interested in or that I was watching. So when I got to be an adult, I kept finding myself going to see these alien movies and apocalyptic movies and kept having conversations about, do you remember when Will Robinson in Lost in Space, And so I kind of didn't even realize I was a sci-fi person until, someone said, you like sci-fi. So I was like, okay, I guess I do. And a couple years ago, I think it was around 2005, there was this film that came out, I think it was an English film called The Descent, which is about 6 or 7 women who go on this annual sort of venture. And in the film, they were this particular year they were going to the Smoky Mountains to do some. I think it's called caving, when you dive into the caves. Mm-hmm. And I saw that film, and I was like, "Oh my God, I have this idea. I want to see some black men in the woods dealing with some unknown entity." And from there, I just sort of like put together my passion and my interest with aliens and this idea of this apocalyptic world and this sort of unknown force that's going to force people to change forever, and that where people's personal and political priorities are challenged and they just have to survive. And what does that mean? And particularly, what does that mean when it's just black people? And so, for me, it's not necessarily, I didn't sit down like, okay, I want to write a story about black people in sci-fi. I just wanted to tell a sci-fi story, and I wanted to put people in the story that have everything to do with my everyday life, which are black people.
Why do you think we see so very few representations of black life within, sci-fi films, sci-fi books? I mean, there's always the ongoing story about the one black guy who shows up who we know is going to get killed, well before the ending of the show. But right. It seems that those folks who do sci-fi writing just don't think about it being a more multicultural or diverse space. I mean, we do have the example of, say, Deep Space Nine and right. Avery Brooks and his role in that kind of context. And there was that great episode, Beyond the Stars, where right. they go back to the future and he imagines himself as kind of a sci-fi writer who can't let his audience know that he's African-American.
Right.
Why do you think that's the case?
Oh, man. We could talk about this forever and ever. One, I think it has a lot to do with the imagination and the consciousness of the larger white culture and community. Mm-hmm. I think that for the most part, black and brown people, and often women too, exist as sort of people who just consume, and they're not participants. They're just sort of consuming whatever's provided for them. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times just in their everyday thinking and their everyday creativity, we don't exist as equal participants, or that we're equally invested in the world as it is, or the future of the world. And I feel like they also have sort of ordained themselves as creative and cultural custodians of everyone's experience. So whether it's sci-fi, whether it's drama, or even comedy, because even in comedies, we exist as these sort of asexual, partnerless, funny people who don't really have anything at stake, Right. And I think with sci-fi in particular, I think what's kind of dangerous about that kind of creativity and imagination is that we don't exist in the future as important role players and decision makers. What's interesting to me, a couple of years ago, I wrote this short piece for The Root that was never published, but it was about, it was around the time that Obama was being elected. And so Lynette Clementson, who was the managing editor at the time, asked me to write something about Black men, Black presidents in our film and TV canons. And I did a lot of research and discovered that the only time Black men exist as far as presidents, being presidents in the country, is when there is some apocalyptic thing happening. It's like when nothing really matters, like race is not important, gender is not important. All that matters is the comet's going to land in 5 minutes. Right. What are we going to do? Right. And so I just feel like maybe there is this, to go back to what I was originally sort of talking about, was I think there is something in the creative consciousness of the larger white community that doesn't see the Black story or the Black narrative as being an equal participant in either the present or the future. And so you're not going to see us in sci-fi. You're not going to see us,
You're watching Left of Black. We're talking with Joseph Atkins about his new digital sci-fi series, The Abandoned. Let me ask you, Joseph, as you were kind of conceiving of this project, did you ever think about going the more traditional television route? Or were you always kind of focused on doing it on a digital platform the way you've done it at this time?
Well, I've always, I worked in TV for a while. So I worked as a writer for the show Girlfriends, which is the CW, under the tutelage and leadership of Maya Brock-Akil, props to Mara. And what I learned on that show was, one, the show was not funded like most network shows are funded. So that I think that became sort of a given when it comes to Black narrative on TV. And so Mara did a lot of pushing as far as getting as much resources as she could for what little money that she had. And I thought she did a really great job as far as bringing quality to the production value and just with the acting and all that. So with that said, I kind of understand how TV works, and I understand that there's always compromise and there's always sort of limitations. And for me, someone who also pitches series and pitches episodes to, networks from HBO to, Maya Films or whatever it is, I'm not really interested in waiting around forever for someone to greenlight me.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And so for me, like the digital world, the digital platform, the online platform is ideal because I can have complete control for the most part over the content, over the creative exploration, the aesthetic, who I cast. And thank God to social networking with, crowdfunding campaigns like, Indiegogo and Kickstarter, I can actually generate my own funds to support my own original ideas. It was interesting, like I originally pitched this series or the idea for the pilot to an industry executive, I won't say what network or what production company, but they actually was really interested in it and then asked me at the end of the pitch if there were any white men. They didn't even say white women, they said any white men. I said, actually not essential characters, no, and I'm not sure when they're gonna show up. He said, yeah, well, there's nothing I can do for you because, demographics show that white men are the ones who watch sci-fi, and so a Black sci-fi show is not gonna work. And when he said that to me, I already kind of knew that that was a potential outcome of that pitch. But after that happened, I was like, I'm done. I don't need this industry approval. I just want to do it. I just want to create the opportunities. And I talk to so many Black and brown people who you just mention sci-fi and they just get ecstatic, Right. So I'm like, there is a demographic. You're just not interested in it,
Right.
Yeah. So digital platform, that's it for me. That's the easier route.
I mean, we've seen some great success the last couple of years. Issa Rae, of course, and Awkward Black Girl. I was a big fan of Black and Sexy TV's, Roomy Lovers, Friends. What kind of opportunities do you think there are now for Black filmmakers and black television writers with this new digital platform? And do you really think that we're taking enough advantage of the opportunities that come with this new platform?
Well, I certainly feel like there are a lot of opportunities because one, I mean, the digital platform and the online platform is endless. I mean, there's nothing that you can't do with it. And I feel like, so with that, yes, the opportunities are endless, one. Two, I also think what should be noted with this digital world is that the same type of financial revenue isn't going to happen the way it happens on traditional network TV. And I feel a lot of times, black and brown folks want to be paid, and certainly I understand that. But this platform at least allows for the opportunity to build and sort of rethink about what TV and film looks like, and then sort of restructure and rebuild the institution so that there is ultimate revenue, but that revenue isn't the ultimate thing that we're looking for.
Right.
A lot of times, I worked in TV and a little bit in film, and I talked to a lot of black and brown folk, and they certainly, money is a lot of times the first and foremost thing they're talking about. I mean, actually, that's across the board. It doesn't make a difference who the person is, but a lot of times, money and revenue and the back end is the big conversation, and not necessarily the work itself. And I was talking to Tim Reed, the actor producer Tim Reed, a couple of weeks ago, and what he was saying to me was that what really catches his eye and the eye of a lot of people these days is quality. That what's missing a lot is quality, and I feel like a lot of people are compromised in traditional network TV and film because they have to fit into a certain structure, right? And a lot of times, you feel rushed, or you feel like you have to appease a certain person, and then you sort of relinquish a lot of your creative quality or whatever it is. And I feel like the online and digital platform, one, it creates opportunities that are endless. One, the money is not absolutely there at this point, but you can have control that where your quality is awesome. You can cast whoever you want. You'll get the viewership. You're actually helping build demographic that ultimately would impact the larger network system. I think it's the place to be, man. I mean, and I was listening to an interview with Tracy Edmonds a couple of days ago. She was on the Political Jones radio show, and she was talking about her All Right TV, which I think is like I want to say a faith-based TV. Okay, but I think it's digital. I think it's a digital platform. And she was just talking about how she's been in these meetings recently with all these industry heads, and basically in 5 to 7 years, it's all going to be digital. It's all going to be on the laptop. Right. So, I think now is the time for all of us to become pioneers. That's it.
We're talking with Joseph Atkins, who's the writer and director of the new web series, a sci-fi web series called The Abandoned. Keith, you've had 10,000 plus folks who viewed the pilot, and we're all asking the same question. When are we going to see some more of The Abandoned?
Well, I have a two-sided answer to that. Well, the first, hopefully sometime later this month, the second episode will be available. And I'm very excited by this episode because I introduced the female character, and a lot of people don't realize there is a female character. They think it's all guys, but actually there is a significant female character. Actually, the name of the character is Asha Jones, and she's mentioned in the first episode. Okay. She's the ex-wife of the crazy Kendall character.
Right, there's a little drama going on, right.
So she's the central piece in that drama. So we meet her in the second episode. So hopefully before the end of February, we'll have that episode. But secondly, it's also about raising funds. I mean, this stuff isn't easy to make because of because I'm so invested in quality. I could easily accept $2,000 and put something together, and then it just won't be what I want it to be. Yeah. So we're actually in the middle of still raising funds. So if folks want to help us out, go to our website, click the donate button. But yeah, so it really depends on. It's not so much about the second episode, but the next episodes after that. Depends on how much money we make and how quickly we make it. So.
We've been joined this afternoon by Joseph Atkins, who's a playwright and screenwriter, artistic director. He's also an adjunct professor at the Columbia University School of the Arts. He is currently the writer and director of the digital sci-fi series, The Abandoned. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, Keith.
Thanks a lot, Mark. It was a great time.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Bettina L. Love, assistant professor in the Department of Elementary and Social Studies at the University of Georgia, the author of Hip Hop's Little Sisters Speak, Negotiating Hip Hop Identities and Politics in the New South. That's Peter Lang Publishing. Of the book, noted sociolinguistic linguist Elaine Richardson says, with the unflinching bravery of a hip hop feminist, Bettina L. Love confronts the damaging effects of hip hop on young black girls while loving hip hop and articulating how it reflects the racism, capitalism, sexism, and patriarchy of America. How are you doing today, Professor Love?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on, Dr. Neal.
Talk a little bit about, this book, your interest in doing an ethnography of black girlhood, of urban black girlhood. It's not a subject matter. There's a whole lot of print and critique about black women these days, but comparatively, little scholarship is actually dealing with the lives of black girls and how they're negotiating the space. So talk a little bit about your interest in the world of black girlhood.
I think that's exactly why I chose to do it. I'm in my classes, I'm talking a lot about black girlhood, but there's not a lot of text on black girlhood. And then also, as a hip hop feminist, I really wanted to bring the stories of young black girls to the forefront and to get a fuller picture. I can never tell the full picture, but I think it's important that we start to talk about how African American girls negotiate hip hop music in very honest ways. And then to also think about how they do that in a certain city, in a particular city, because I think it's not monolithic. So I really wanted to bring black girls' voices, their stories to the forefront in a more complex way to just say, like, they like hip hop music, they interact with hip hop music, but what about the structures that they interact with hip hop in?
It's interesting because if we were to take, 10 of the most successful male hip hop artists, of the last 30 years, and then try to put together a comparative list of the most successful female artists, with the exception of very few, comparatively in terms of visibility, sustainability of their careers, record sales. The male artists would far outshadow, would definitely, cast a shadow on women artists. And so there's a way in which, when we think about hip hop, we don't expect to hear a female voice there. Yeah. We don't expect to hear, as Intozaki Shange would say, we don't expect to hear a black girl song in hip hop. But part of the genius of your book is that you tease out where there is, in fact, a black girl song in this broader culture of hip hop.
Yeah. And I'm part of that song.
Yeah.
And so that's why it was so important to me, not only to tell the story of these 6 young girls, but also to tell my story. As Joan Morgan would say, I'm a feminist, a daughter of privilege. And so here I am with this opportunity, not only to tell their story, but to tell my story, and then also to make this story more complex. And so even though we may not be in the mainstream, we may not be the face of hip hop, we are shouting from the sidelines that you're going to hear us. And so a lot of it was about saying, young black girls are listening to this music, they are engaging with this music in very complex ways, and this is just how they're doing it in Atlanta, Georgia. And they could be doing it very differently in other places, but in the A, this is what is happening. These are the politics, this is the race relations, this is the gentrification, these are the things on the ground that the young girls have on one side, is this local context, and then hip hop on the other side, and they're in the middle, and they're trying to negotiate all these complex spaces.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Professor Bettina L. Love, who's the author of the new book, Hip Hop's Little Sisters Speak, Negotiating Hip Hop Identities and the Politics in the New South, Peter Lang Publishing. This book is also in part a kind of ethnography, if you will, of the New South, of what's happening in a place like Atlanta. And I'm gonna tease you a bit here, because I know because you are in the dirty South, you can claim New York in a certain kind of way, but because I know where Rochester is, right, in relationship to New York City, right, we understand that, you're funning with these folks down South, yeah. Right, but what does it mean for you in terms of your own positionality? You mentioned privilege, from Western New York, queer, to go in the dirty South and all that means in terms of black life, and be able to negotiate this, not only to find out what's going on with the lives of black girls, but for you to actually have a viable space within this context also.
Number one, I had to do a lot of internal work. I tell a story in the book about, my father was from Jacksonville, Florida, And my mother was from upstate New York, but her family was from South Carolina. And so that black migration. And my mother hated traveling to the South every summer. So my father would get into his baby blue Cadillac. It was leather. And we would shine it up, and he would drive down to the South. And my mother would just say egregious things about Southerners. Oh, they are so country. They are slow. And all of these things played on me when I moved to the South, and I did this research with these young girls. So a lot of it had to do with me doing my own internalized work to understand how these internalized stereotypes played on me, and then also Southern hip hop. You know, I talk about in the book, I love Outkast, right? I love the Southern twang of Andre 3000, but I didn't like to hear that Southern twang with my students. Right. And so dealing with these internalized feelings and stereotypes we have about other black folks. And I had to do a lot of that work to understand Dirty South music, to appreciate Dirty South music, and then to understand the context in which it is. And then also being someone who is openly queer. And so dealing with homophobia in the South and how that gave me a space to really take up some of my own issues that I had around what I thought I was openly gay until I got with these young girls. And they really put my sexuality on the forefront. And I couldn't do research with them until I internalized this homophobia and recognized that I had it. And they provided space for me to research them. And so it was a lot going on within this space that I was trying to work through along with these young girls.
One of the things that's always interesting around hip hop scholarship, and particularly how young folks engage it, there's older generations of folks who are really just totally dismissive of hip hop. And so their grandchildren and their children are sitting here kind of consuming all of these things, and these adults have no idea what they're consuming. What's refreshing about your work, or say the work of someone like David Stovall, is that you take seriously how these young folks are consuming hip hop culture, hip hop visuals, and you sit down with them. Yeah. As you mentioned, this is as much your culture as it is their culture. What was it like to sit down with these girls, with these young teenagers, and watch these hip hop visuals, to have them talk about what it was like to see certain kind of body types come up over and over again, right? The chapter where you talk about the absence, where the white women at, right? Why don't we ever see white women in these situations, in these music videos? Why is it always black women? And why is it always black women that look a certain kind of way? What kind of things, surprised you in sitting down and talking with these young girls about these issues?
First, it was how candid they were, how blunt, how in tune, how keen they were. And they picked up on so much. And I knew that these girls were critical thinkers, but for me to sit back and say, wow, they're consuming all of this, and they're being critical of all of this, but then also to paint a fuller picture to say, okay, they don't have a real space to be critical. They don't have a space to have these conversations. They can't have these conversations in their AP English classes. They can't have these conversations in their math classes. So for them, they wanted to engage in these conversations. And I think what made it so difficult for me at times is because of my queerness, they didn't see me as a role model. They didn't see me as another black woman that they were talking to. So I really got an in-depth look at what they thought about black women, because when they were talking about black women, they weren't talking about me.
Yeah.
And so it became this really awkward space where they're talking about not having role models, or this person is a role model. And I'm sitting across from them like,
wondering, what's up?
Hey, I'm here, guys. I'm with you every day in the trenches. Do you think I'm a role model? And they're, so it was really difficult, I think, at times to hear them and to not know what to do with that. Not knowing how to engage them differently. I talk about in the book, if there was another gender performance, maybe the book would be totally different. Maybe the data would have been totally different. But I think my embodiment of gender really played a lot into the research and the research findings that I got.
You talk about in relation to your own life, growing up and playing ball very often with uncles and cousins, and how that kind of gave you insight into performances of black masculinity and also hip hop, right? It becomes your entree into hip hop. How has that kind of knowledge helped you in talking to young black girls about how they navigate the world that they're in?
I think for me, at first, I was very uncomfortable doing that work. And that was one of the reasons why the girls put me on Front Street the first day I met them. One of the questions they asked me as soon as I met them, maybe we've known each other maybe 3 minutes, the girls came up to me and said, "You gay?" I said, "Whoa!"
Wow.
And, me being a witty kid growing up with males, my first response back was, "You my business." And so, we started this relationship that was built on these tensions. And so I think at a certain point it helped and it hindered, because I was at a place where I wasn't ready to talk about my experiences being a lesbian, and I thought I was openly gay. But I also think, having an upbringing of playing basketball, being around a lot of males, it does have this confidence. Yeah. It does invoke this, what we would call hip hop swag for a queer woman. And I think the kids oftentimes really relate to that. I go into schools a lot. I do a lot of workshop with schools. I just left one, actually, and the kids eat it up. And I think it's because not only is it this swag, but it's also an authenticity. And when the girls realized that I was there truly just to learn from them, it opened up.
You talk towards the end of the book about rethinking what we might term hip-hop pedagogy. Talk a little bit about some of the strategies to get us to that place of rethinking about what hip-hop pedagogy can be.
For me, in the book, thinking about reframing hip-hop pedagogies and also about my regrets. I have a lot of regrets with the work that I did in the book. Number one, because I sat there, I listened to those young girls, but I'm also an educator. And I forgot that I was an educator. I forgot that I was there also to teach. Yeah, and so right now, a lot of my work is really about hip-hop pedagogy more than rap. And I think a lot of our youth understand hip-hop as only rap. And when they do that, they don't understand that rap is actually culture. And we minimize rap. Yeah. When we minimize hip hop when we only see it as rap. Right. So I think about embracing the elements of hip hop, and then also embracing the fifth element of hip hop, and teaching kids about knowledge of self and knowledge of community and how we engage in that. So a lot of my work now, post the book, is really about the fifth element of hip hop, and a lot of that has to do with my regrets in the research field, being a young researcher, being someone who wanted to have doctor behind their name, and I got really caught up in that and forgetting that I was an educator first, and I should have been there for those girls first as an educator. So as they were telling me those stories and dealing with how they were constructing notions of identity by not seeing Black women, I should have been stepping in. But I was more concerned with, I got this rich data. And so a lot of that has to do with me trying to right my wrongs and thinking about hip-hop pedagogy on a more brighter scope about what we can do, and including all the elements of hip-hop and not marginalizing hip-hop culture.
What's the response been to the book so far?
It's been crazy. I'm on the show, right? It's been absolutely crazy, though. I had my students read it, and for me, what really makes me feel good is when people from the South, who born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, or came to Atlanta, Georgia post-Olympics or after the Olympics or during the Olympics, and they really understand the new South and the new Atlanta, Georgia, and they come up to me and say, "You got it right." And that really makes me feel good, especially as a researcher, as someone who was an insider, outsider negotiating that status, someone who was working the hyphen. And so for me, as a upstate New Yorker, to come down and Southern folks tell me, "You know what? You got it right." That feels really, really good. More than any other award or any other acknowledgement, is that I represented the people of this city.
What's next for you, Bettina?
A lot of my work right now is really taking hip hop pedagogy to the classrooms and taking it to elementary classrooms. My work that I did with the girls in the book is high school. And I've learned that, I have to start younger. So right now I'm working with fifth graders in Atlanta, Georgia, and the program that I created is called Real Talk, Hip Hop Education for Social Justice. And we're not only linking hip hop to school, we're linking hip hop to issues of social justice. So the kids, for their final project, they did a movie on the death of Trayvon Martin. And the movie is just very powerful. They actually have the ghost of Trayvon watching in the back, watching everything that we're doing. And kids came up with this. They storyboarded the movie, they wrote the movie, directed the movie, shot the camera angles for the movie. So trying to use multiple literacies to get kids not only engaged in education, but also education being meaningful. And we can still hit Common Core standards. We can still teach kids, but it can be meaningful. It can be done in culturally relevant ways, and it also can have a social justice aspect. And that has a lot to do with me saying, you know what, my failures in that book, I'm trying to right those wrongs.
We've been joined by Professor Bettina L. Love, Assistant Professor in the Department of Elementary and Social Studies at the University of Georgia. She's the author of the new book, Hip Hop's Little Sisters Speak, Negotiating Hip Hop Identities and Politics in the New South. That's a Peter Lang publication. Thank you for joining us, Bettina.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Neal.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G
Eric.
for this one. Yeah. All black everything. All black, you know. All black in the name of all my black heroes. All black everything. All black polos. All black medallions, yeah. All black, you know, say. All black everything. All black, you know. All black in the name of all my